today's episode of She Has a PhD, the podcast where we celebrate extraordinary women in science. I'm Inês Veiga, your host for today. Last week, we heard Joanne's story, a leader in the diversity and inclusion field. Today, she's back to have a short conversation on implicit bias. Joanne, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Joanne, you have been working for decades on bringing conscience to diversity within organizations. In your experience, what are some practical ways that individuals and organizations can raise awareness about implicit bias and foster a more inclusive and equitable environment in the scientific community?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is what I do now full time. So, this is my heart work, trying to make organizations more inclusive, to make everyone feel welcome and to bring their whole selves to work. Initially when the concept of implicit bias came out, it seemed so obvious to me that that's what all those small insults were. I don't think any person gets up and says, I really wish all of my daughters would make less money than my sons for doing the same work. I don't actually think anybody says that, or very few people at least, So something was clearly going on, with very good people making very bad decisions about the words they used, the way that they promoted people, just the way their choices in, managing their workplace environment. And I actually, one of the problems, though, is that implicit bias has taken this aura of like, if we have bias awareness training, everything will be fixed. And in fact, studies show that if your organization just does bias awareness training, it does more damage than good in an organization. So the approach that we take and that I favor is to really have ongoing dialogue about inclusion and diversity and equity, and it's important in an organization. It has to be integrated into all the systems of an organization. Dialogue, benefits, promotion practices, hiring practices, policies, messaging, communications. And so what I do now is really work with the firm and also with other clients on making sure that these elements are integrated fully into their organizations. And it's not something that can happen in 1 year, 1 month, or it needs to be like a roadmap of things. And we favor an approach where an organization sets a few reasonable goals for this year, accomplishes those goals, and then moves on to the next goals, because we want people to feel satisfied and successful about this work. And so, we know that people have biases. We all have them. The question is, how can we check ourselves? So my short advice on bias for individuals is to question yourself all the time. Question yourself all the time. When you meet that person, what is obvious to you in your head that is blocking you from seeing their talent and their skill? Are you noticing that their hair is long because it's a woman and not a man with short hair, which is generally thought to be more professional? Are you noticing their clothing, which may or may not have anything to do with their capabilities? Are you noticing their name, which is difficult to pronounce? You really can't tell anything about someone by their name, but we have biases automatically just by what people are called, and so, really, really questioning your assumptions about people. And I like to do that by trying to get to know the person a little bit as a person first, and seek what we have in common. Are we both kind of crazy about plastic and starting to do composting because we're worried about the earth? Do we both have an electric car? Do we both have a, mother-in-law that's a great shopper? Like, whatever your things are, I try to look for commonality with people, and get me past being focused on the biases and the differences. So that piece of advice is question yourself. That's the first thing you can do is, of course, educate yourself about bias, but question your assumptions when you meet a candidate, a person, a client, any of those things.
Being a woman and a leader in the scientific field, what main obstacles have you encountered and how have you pivoted them?
As I mentioned before, I haven't been directly affected by overt harassment in my career, but I've certainly experienced many barriers, lack of equity, lack of inclusion, lack of support. From my early days in pharma, when there was no place for me to express milk for my new baby, my office had a window. It was against company regulations to cover the windows. I was expected to express milk in a bathroom, which is disgusting to make food in the bathroom. So, it wasn't an overt thing. It was just in those days, it was a real lack of attention to inclusion and including everyone for absolutely necessary biological things to allow them to work, and so I faced many things like that. I faced a lack of recognition for my work, assuming I was an administrator, not a leader in projects. All kinds of those small things that add up to hold one back in one's career. Fortunately, I was recognized by a lot of open-minded people also that gave me opportunities to lead and to advance and learn from new positions and new roles.
Great. I'm glad you had that opportunity. And you believe that everyone should be held accountable for speaking up about implicit bias, not only women. What steps do you believe different gendered people should take in order to drive this matter?
Yeah, I get really tired of going to panels on why inclusion is important in a room full of women. I love women's organizations. I founded one. It is a huge support for women, but I'm really tired of seeing non-diverse groups talk about diversity. It's really not. It's really not where we need to be. We need every person to honestly be striving. Um, how can I do that? We all have relationships with people of all genders now, and it's really important that everyone takes personal responsibility for their colleagues and for their friends and their, to make their situations better and easier. I mean, in my generation of the world, if you poll people, about 6% of those people will say that they are LGBTQ or gender nonconforming or non-binary. But in the current generation of young people entering the workforce, I say young people because I'm talking about earlier career, but also entering the workforce, it's more like 20% of them will identify as LGBTQ, non-binary, or gender nonconforming. And so, wow, that's we're going to miss out on a lot of good employees if we exclude all of the women, all of the gender nonconforming people, all of the people of color. It's just, we just can't operate the world that way. We're missing out on talent, and I do it because it's the right thing to do. I think every human being should have an equal opportunity to advance and pursue their passions. But from a business case, it is clear that we need to do a better job. And since most of our leaders are not women, continues to be the case even after many years of working at it, leadership must be actively engaged, not passively, not watching a DEI officer do it, not hiring someone else to take care of inclusion. The leaders themselves must be engaged, involved, and vocal about the importance within their organizations. There is no other way we will drive change.
Great. The last topic. What would you recommend our listeners to read or watch to learn more about diversity and inclusion?
Wow. So, as I said, I'm a voracious reader. I make it a point of adding to my reading list books written by people who are very different from me, whether that be around gender identity or race or ethnic origin, spoken language, all those things. I only read in English, but I read translations of many books by people, very diverse authors. So, and if reading books is not your thing, there's certainly a lot of great online visuals from people that are different than you. So I suggest that you learn from people who have identities, what their identities are about. That's the most interesting way and the best way to do it. So there's just too many great books and great resources to read, but I look for people that are different from you. That's a great place to start.
Yes, great. And if you want to add maybe a suggestion, we can put in the comments of this podcast.
Okay,
later.
I'll send on a few things I've been reading recently. So
great. Thank you, Joanne, for sharing your insights on implicit bias. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in for today's episode. Make sure to check out last week's episode to hear more about Joanne and her career trajectory. She has a PhD, will be coming back soon. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and remember your power to have a positive impact on the world. See you soon.